and welcome to Bleak. This week we'll be covering the murder of Betsy Faria. Buckle your seatbelt, it's about to get bleak.
Hello, Julia Childs.
No, this is your host, Mrs. Doubtfire.
Oh, Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah.
I was totally thinking Julia Child from my childhood.
I loved Mrs. Doubtfire. I think it's a great program.
It is. That is a really cute movie. Really cute movie. But it doesn't top my all-time favorite, The Burbs. That is a good movie.
Well, if you haven't seen The Burbs, which most of you probably have not, you really should check it out.
I think everybody has seen The Burbs.
No. It's a great movie, but it's like a cult classic, like...
I've seen it maybe 9,000 times.
It's a very good one.
Yes, it is. Yes, it never gets old either.
No, it doesn't.
No.
I was trying to think of a good line from that movie.
Yes.
I've never seen somebody bang the hell out of their garbage with a stick.
Yeah, when they're driving down and, oh yeah, you just gotta watch it. You gotta watch it.
Yes, big recommendation. I don't typically even normally like 80s movies that much.
Yeah.
And I think it's great.
Yeah, it is. It is. I like a lot of those creepy cult classics. So, like Rosemary's Baby. That was the 70s, I believe. But, anyways.
All right.
I made Zoe watch a lot of those films. Harold and Maude.
Yeah, and look at her. Look at her go.
She's doing well.
That's what I mean. Like, I don't mean it in a bad way.
She's doing well. See, it helped form a well-rounded person.
Yes.
Though she was like, what are you making me watch? She was a teenager, not a youngin'.
Okay, so just a quick note, and it's not a huge deal, but not last week, but our last episode, we covered Jody Sanderholm, the murder of Jody Sanderholm, and for some reason, and maybe Laura can explain to you better, we said she lived in Arkansas, but she actually lived in Arkansas City, Kansas, which Laura can explain to you.
Yeah, so Arkansas City, Kansas, I got confused because in Kansas, only Kansans pronounce it as Arkansas City. But everyone else outside of Kansas pronounces the name Arkansas City. So I was getting confused when they were saying Arkansas and then some were saying Arkansas and some were saying... It's not a big deal
at all, but we just wanted to
clarify
it.
The location.
Yes.
It was Kansas, not Arkansas, but it was in the town of Arkansas City, a.k.a. Arkansas City, if you're from Kansas, but we're outside of Kansas, so we would pronounce it Arkansas City. Very confusing.
But she didn't live in Arkansas, she lived in Kansas.
But she lived in Kansas.
That's really the only correction we're making.
That's the correction.
And I just wanted to add
Is that clear as mud, maybe?
Yeah, clear as mud.
Yes.
Also, the last episode, right around the 6-minute mark, for some reason the audio gets really quiet. But if you were listening and you're like, well, I can't hear it anymore, so I'm not going to listen to the rest, around the 9-minute mark, the audio goes back to completely normal. I don't know why it got like that, but I just figured I'd mention it if you wanted to, if you happen to not listen to the full episode for that reason.
Oh.
So anyhow, with that being said, I will, we can just get started here because this case is very convoluted and complicated.
Really bizarre.
I will say, and I hate to say it's my favorite case because it just sounds maybe in poor taste, but this case has so many elements to it. It's got wrongful conviction, it's got prosecutorial misconduct, it's got it's got serial killing, it's got kind of somebody not being caught because of their perception in society of being an older white woman.
Yep.
So it's got so many elements, and it has actually been covered pretty widely.
Thoroughly, yeah.
But I feel like I have kind of my own take on it. I've thoroughly researched this case.
Yeah.
So, and Laura is familiar with it also.
Yes, a lot of people might be, but there are so many different facets to this case that each time you listen to somebody's version or somebody's take on it, you pick up something a little bit different.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that I can provide some details or some
extra details
that you maybe haven't heard on this one.
Yeah.
So we are covering the horrific murder of Betsy Faria. This happened in Lincoln County, which is in Missouri, and Betsy was living in the city of Troy, Missouri. Troy, Missouri has a population as of the last census of around 12 to 13,000. And Betsy was born and raised, I don't know if she was born and raised in Troy, but she was born and raised in small town Missouri, definitely not far from Troy. So just a little background on Betsy. She's described as hardworking, charismatic, very fun-loving. Betsy had one sister named Julie, and Julie described her as always smiling, always laughing. Betsy has two daughters named Leah and Mariah, and they were from her, I don't know if she was ever married before, but they were from a relationship where the father was not in the picture. So she was a single mom. Yeah. And a little fun note on Betsy, she was actually a DJ kind of as a side hustle. And she had an insurance job at one point for State Farm. That was kind of her day job. But apparently she played her DJ as a DJ at
which
weddings.
Was like her passion.
Yes, she loved to dance.
She loved that.
She probably
would have done it full time. It's kind of a pay thing,
Yes.
In that area, how many jobs,
Yeah, they probably don't have a ton of DJs though either.
Well, that's true. That's true.
So Betsy ends up meeting a man named Russell Faria in 1998. Russ describes like a whirlwind romance. And he met Betsy. She was working at a gas station. And Russ says that Betsy actually asked him out.
Oh. And
Russ had no children of his own, so he took on Mariah and Leah as if they were his own children.
I guess they're probably fairly young at the time.
Yes, I know one of them was 3 or 4.
Oh, okay.
So, and the girls, I've actually seen interviews with Mariah. Leah really hasn't done a lot of interviews, if any, but Mariah has done some, and she said, he was our father for all intents and I can't talk today. All intents and purposes.
Right.
So, they apparently had a good relationship. Russ admits that he did have a temper at times. He wasn't perfect, as nobody is.
He seemed kind of like a loud guy, just kind of
boisterous.
Yes. Boisterous.
So I agree. Very much.
It's kind of his personality, sort of.
And so the relationship, I cannot talk today. The relationship between Betsy and Russ, they argued as many couples do. They had separated at one point. I don't know when exactly that was, but
they separated 3 times, and she was very strong-willed as well. So it was very like this.
That could be problematic for a relationship, having 2 people like that.
Yeah. But all in all, it sounds like they really did love each other, but...
Yeah, and Russ had said in one interview that separating kind of made him realize how much he did love her.
Right.
When, he kind of like absence makes the heart grow fonder type of thing.
Right.
But in 2009, everyone's just kind of living their life and normal family life, and Betsy gets some really terrible news. So I don't know how she found this out, if it was just routine testing, but she got diagnosed with breast cancer. Now, when she died, she was only 42, so this had to have been when she was only 40.
Oh.
So finding out at 40 you have breast cancer is pretty...
Must have maybe her first mammals, because 40 is your first screening. I mean, It changed the ages and everything, but that'd be awful to maybe go to your first mammo and it's...
and you have cancer.
Oh.
I don't know what stage it was or
Right.
anything like that, but she did have a mastectomy.
Yep.
She also, due to this diagnosis, and understandably so, did have some intermittent depression.
Mm-hmm.
And on January 19th, 2010, Betsy actually got pulled over, and I don't know why she was pulled over, maybe driving erratically, but she told the police officer that she wanted a gun to kill herself. So she had suicidal ideations at times, but it was related to the diagnosis, and she did reach
Right.
out to her family and friends for support.
Right.
And I don't think it was ever like where she actually made an attempt on her life.
Right.
But I want to mention that because it kind of does come into play later on.
Yeah.
So
And everybody reacts differently to those type of diagnoses.
Oh, for sure.
You know, people just
maybe like I
So
want to
sad.
die on my own terms type of a thing.
Right.
So because she had this cancer diagnosis, many people, her friends and family stepped up to help her. And because she had to sit in a chemo, like getting infusions,
Right.
she had friends driving her to chemo, and then sometimes they would sit there, because it can take several hours. And so they'd sit there while she was getting the chemo infusions, and they would, keep her company type of thing.
Sounds like she was kind of a talker, and she needed
Yep.
that type of
So
support.
one friend in particular that was helping Betsy with rides and with keeping her company was a woman named Pam Hupp. Pam and Betsy met because they both worked for State Farm Insurance.
Right.
So Pam, I don't think they were like the best of friends, but it was almost like Pam Hupp kind of showed up in her life more so after this diagnosis and offered to help her.
Right. It just seemed like she was like just a good person doing good things.
Right.
For a friend.
I don't know exactly when, but Betsy was declared cancer free. I believe it was later in 2011. So she's declared cancer free. Oh, it was 1 year after the diagnosis. And so because, of course, she was thrilled with that news.
Well,
And
yeah.
Betsy had always wanted to go on an Alaskan cruise. So she, after being declared cancer free, she got to go on this Alaskan cruise. She swam with the dolphins. I guess 20 of her close friends and family went on the cruise with her.
Oh,
And they called it a celebration of life cruise.
that's really cool.
And when Betsy got back from the trip, unfortunately, and when you have cancer, you have more chance of getting a recurrence
Right.
than a person that's never had cancer, and also you get, frequent screenings.
Monitoring. Yeah.
Yes. And so she found out on one of those screenings that she had recurrence of her cancer. So the cancer was back, and this time it was stage 4 and in her liver.
Oh no.
So stage 4 cancer of the liver is unfortunately not considered a curable cancer.
Right.
And so, of course, this was really bad news, and Betsy was told she had about 2 or 3 years to live. So it wasn't like, and she was still going to continue the chemo, and, sometimes you can be involved in, like, a research study type thing.
Right.
And so it wasn't like she was going to die the next day or something like that, but
Right.
of course...
Eventually.
Yeah, it's just, it's a kind of a poor prognosis.
Right.
But it sounded like she was on board to keep doing the chemo and to try to extend her life, as much
maybe
as
even
she
more
could.
than that. Yeah, if
Right.
she could.
So on Tuesday, December 27th, this is 2011, Betsy had a chemo appointment, and Russ attended his weekly game night every Tuesday with a group of his buddies.
Right. To get away, get out of the house.
Yep, and that was something that he had done for a while. It was part of the routine. So Russ explains that the plan was for Betsy to go to chemo, go and visit with her mom after chemo, and that Pam Hupp would give Betsy a ride home. Now, this is something that's varied from source to source, because I had heard that Betsy told Pam that she didn't need a ride and asked her, like sent her a text saying, hey, I don't need you to pick me up, because she had like a friend she hadn't seen in a long time who was gonna do it.
Right.
And then Pam like ignored the text and showed up anyway. I've heard that like on several sources.
That is so. Oh.
This particular one that I was taking notes on this time didn't mention that.
Yeah.
But it was either that Pam kind of pushed her way into giving her a ride despite that,
right.
but either way Pam gives her a ride. So I don't know what version is true. I guess it doesn't really matter at this point, but it kind of gives you an idea that Pam is being a little like, why does she want to give her a ride so badly?
Right.
It just seems a little pushy.
Right.
So Russ attends game night like he always does, and he leaves game night around 9:15 p.m.
Right.
And begins driving home. I believe his friend lived about a half hour away.
Yeah.
So Russ arrives home. He said he, had a bag of dog food because he had stopped on the way so he had gone to game night straight from work.
Right.
So he had stopped and got like dog food and stuff. So he said he set the dog food down on the floor when he got home, and he was taking off his jacket, and he looks over to the living room, and he sees his wife clearly dead on the floor. She's laying on the floor, and it wasn't like questionable. Like, it was so gruesome, the scene was, that he knew she was deceased.
Right.
So he's, of course, beside himself. He's freaking out. He immediately calls 911.
Well, yeah.
As you would.
Yes.
So he tells the 911 operator, he's screaming, he's frantic. He's like, oh my gosh, my wife killed herself. And
because she's been suicidal before.
Right, and that's why I brought that up about the whole cop incident, because because this comes under suspicion later on, but if you keep in mind the fact that Betsy has been suicidal, then it kind of makes more sense why he might think that.
Right.
And he said, oh my gosh, there's a knife in her neck, and she slashed her arms, and he just thinks she's killed herself.
Right, like...
And that is an odd way to commit suicide.
Yeah.
But,
wouldn't be the first choice.
No, not for me either.
Not for anybody.
But it does happen.
Well, yeah, it does. It does. Like, in a state of complete...
And women don't typically choose that route either. That's statistically. But, side note, there's an Ellen Greenberg case where they don't know if she was killed or killed herself, and it was a stabbing. So check that one out. But anyway.
That's interesting.
So it has, it's not like it's impossible, but it's not common.
Right.
So when the police arrive, like I said, it was immediately evident that she was murdered and not that she had committed suicide. The police were like, I don't know how Russ could have thought she killed herself based on how gruesome the scene was.
Right, but you have to think,
he's shocked.
He's shocked. She's spoken of suicide before. What was he supposed to think? I guess,
I think too, if you think about your first thought, especially when you have your wife has been suicidal in the past, you're not going to think somebody murdered her, because what would their motive be to murder her?
Right. She doesn't have that long to live.
Right.
I mean, what's the point?
And he just, so of course that's just what, but they just made a big deal about that, like it was suspicious.
They did. Yeah.
So, this comes from a crime scene investigator that worked on this case. She said that, when you entered the home, Betsy was laying on the living room floor. There was a knife sticking out of the left side of her neck. She had defensive wounds found on her arms and hands. And she said one of her arms was cut nearly to the bone.
Ugh.
There was blood splatter in the living room, and obviously they considered it a crime scene.
Yeah.
Police did know that whoever killed Betsy would have had a lot of blood on themselves. And there was no blood trail leading out of the house.
Right.
So they were kind of confused by that. And they didn't see any evidence of a cleanup in the drains. So, they can check the pipes for blood and whatnot, and they didn't find anything.
The sinks and the...
Yeah. So, for whatever reason, the police were immediately suspicious of Russ. I think it started with him declaring that he thought she committed suicide.
Right.
But Russ willingly went to the sheriff's department to be interrogated that very night. He tells the interrogator that he got off work at 5 p.m. He tells him about game night and that he called Betsy after work to make sure she didn't need a ride home from chemo. And he explains that Betsy told him that her friend was going to pick her up, her friend named Pam Hupp.
Right.
So, Russ tells investigators he went to his friend Mike's house and they watched some movies and played some games, and it ended up starting with maybe 2 or 3 guys, and it ended up being 4 guys in total that were there.
Right.
So he was, he leaves work around 5, and he was over at his friend's till about 9:15.
Right.
So Russ says they were going to start another movie, and he just wasn't up to start another movie, so he leaves.
Right.
He was hungry, so he stopped at Arby's for a couple sandwiches.
That's what you do when you're hungry.
And he,
I love me some
comes
Arby's.
home and stumbles upon the scene and immediately calls the police.
Yeah.
So the police immediately start asking Russ about life insurance. And Russ explains, that yes, Betsy had life insurance and that she wanted the proceeds to be split between her 2 daughters. So
Right.
Russ knew that.
Right, not him.
Not himself.
Yeah.
It sounded like that was what he would be planning on doing, would be to give it to the girls.
Right.
So at this point, Mariah was 17 and Leah was 21.
Okay.
So Leah was a bit rebellious. At this point, so she's 21, so she was living with her Aunt Julie. We have an Aunt Julie too.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, her Aunt Julie.
Her Aunt Julie,
our
not
Julie.
ours. Shout out Aunt Julie. Woo woo. Because, they just said Leah had some problems.
Right.
She had stolen money from her grandma, and Russ said she kind of had a shady boyfriend, and that at one point Leah and her boyfriend showed up at Betsy and Russ's house, and they called police because
They were breaking in.
Yeah, they were kind of breaking in, or they were going to steal something.
Stuff.
So they were like, it seemed like the relationship at that point in time between Leah and Russ was maybe a bit contentious.
Right.
And Betsy as
she
well.
was going through
a hard time.
a hard time, a criminal, minor criminal time, I guess.
Which it sounds like she's doing a lot better now.
Right. She had a bumpy. She was young.
Yes.
And had as these it happens.
It does happen.
You hear these things.
No, you never had a criminal past. But
I'm like,
Laura,
it happens.
Laura was a little bit rebellious.
I was rebellious. I was not criminally rebellious. Okay, I did not.
Well,
did I do anything illegal? I don't know. I didn't.
No, she never did. I'm just kidding. She was more just alternative. Like, she had the black hair. Not criminal at all, actually. But just, like, listening to Marilyn Manson and having the Marilyn Manson church while singing. Having a Marilyn Manson shirt while singing in the church choir.
I do remember that.
Yes.
With black hair. Oh, yeah.
It was nice. I was not like that at all, so it was a little bit like frightening for me at the time. But now that I'm older, I
was just expressing myself,
Yes.
and I as a I don't know, as a musician and as I think I thought of myself more as a forward thinker.
Yes. Anyhow, we can relate to rebellious teenage years, just
Yes.
not illegal activity. But no judgment here. So anyhow, police interview Russ into the wee hours of the morning, and they had nothing concrete to hold him on, so he's allowed to go. So on the morning of December 28th, 2011, investigators, of course, are going to start interviewing all of Betsy's family and friends, kind of working their way from the closest people on out. So the first place they go is to the Aunt Julie's house. So Betsy's sister Julie, whom the daughter Leah is living with. Because they think, well, if Leah and Betsy have this complicated relationship, maybe Leah had something to do with it.
Right.
So the police don't initially tell Julie and Leah why they're there. So they ask them what they had been doing the evening before, and the aunt, Julie, explains that she took Leah to the cell phone store, and Leah was on Betsy's cell phone plan because Betsy's her mom, and she had wanted to get some kind of upgrade for the cell phone.
Right. As young adults and teenagers frequently want to do.
Exactly.
In my experience.
Yes. And so they called Betsy at like 6:30 and said, "Hey, can you be available? We're going to call you in a little bit so you can approve this upgrade."
Right.
And Betsy had told them that she would be, but once she kind of went in and picked out the new phone or whatever it was, they called Betsy several times from the phone shop, and she didn't answer.
We know why she didn't answer.
But that kind of gives you a timeline.
Right. So something happened prior to that time.
They talked to her at around 6 or 6:30, and then they're calling her at 7:30ish.
Right.
So something happened in that short window.
Hour, 45 minutes, or whatever it was.
And obviously that's not 100%. But if she's saying, "Yeah, I'll be available for this," and then suddenly, why would she just decide not to?
Right.
That doesn't even make sense.
I'm surprised they didn't go over to check on her.
Yeah, that is true.
It's a little weird to me, but but maybe
they, because the relationship was complicated, I think maybe they thought she was just maybe changed her mind,
or something came up with her illness and she needed to address something.
Or she fell asleep because she wasn't feeling well. Or
she had chemo that day. Yeah.
Right. So, for whatever reason, they just went home. And the police finally, of course, tell them what happened, and they're shocked. So, after that, because they knew Pam Hupp was the one that dropped Betsy off, so Betsy, after chemo that day, went to her mom's house.
Right.
And I don't know exactly what parts of the day Pam was present for, but I do know Pam is the one that drove her from her mom's house to her own home. So Pam dropped her off at home.
Right.
For sure.
Yes.
So they're asking Pam, can you just walk us through what, dropping her off? And Pam says she walked Betsy to the door until Betsy could get the light on, because she said the house was really dark and Betsy seemed a bit spooked. And then she said Betsy asked her to stay and watch a movie, but Pam told Betsy she couldn't. And then the police said, well, how come you couldn't stay for a movie? And Pam says, well, I didn't want to be there when Russ got home.
Well,
so, of course, that kind of piqued the police's interest, because they're like, well, why don't you want to be around Russ?
Right.
So Pam says the reason that she didn't want to be around Russ was because she just said he's not very nice to her verbally, her meaning Betsy, and he said it makes me uncomfortable. She said Russ is real pompous, and so Pam also tells police that Betsy considered Pam like a confidant of sorts. And she tells police that the relationship between Betsy and Russ was tense and in trouble.
Right. And
that Russ was making comments about how rich he was going to be after Betsy dies, because she had life insurance.
Oh.
And she said about the weekend before she was murdered, that Russ was like, we're going to play this game. And Russ was putting a pillow over her face and saying something to, along the lines of, "This is how it feels when you die," and just, really a terrible.
She was making accusations, though.
Right.
There was no.
Well, of course, they have no proof of that.
Proof.
But that's what she's Pam's
saying.
narrative.
Right.
So then police ask if Betsy was concerned about life insurance, and Pam says, yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, she asked me to be the beneficiary because she was concerned Russ was going to not give the money to Leah and Mariah.
Right.
So, of course, the police are interested in this. And So instead of the police thinking that, oh my gosh, now Pam Hupp just recently had, this was like 4 days before the murder, she had this life insurance policy transferred into her name.
Right.
Instead of that, the police think, oh, Russ found out about it, and then he killed her.
Right.
So it's like, instead of letting the evidence show them what to think, they went in with this preconceived notion of Russ, and they flipped it to go with their narrative.
Right.
That's how that's kind of becomes a
so-
theme in this case.
That's just so.
It's frustrating, to say the
Awesome.
least. So,
Alan
of course,
is our
a couple...
behind the scenes.
Yes, Alan's our producer. Sorry if this... for our non-paying podcast.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so the prosecuting attorney for this case was a woman named Leah Cheney.
Yes.
She's not my favorite person in this story, I will tell you that.
No.
So,
Oh my gosh.
Leah Cheney is interviewed on this documentary that I watched, and she starts going through why she thought Russ was the killer.
And she's the prosecutor.
And she's the prosecuting attorney. So, the autopsy was done, and Betsy had 55 stab wounds. So, that's a ton. And a lot of them were inflicted post-mortem.
So she was killed, and then they just kept stabbing. Like, whoa.
Yes, it's terrible.
That's awful.
And so they said, well, this was a rage killing. Typically, those are done by people that know you, not by just like a home invasion.
Right.
So that kind of, they were like, well, somebody that knows her, he checks that box. And once they get these autopsy results back, they also found she did have live seminal fluid on the exterior of her body.
Okay.
Now, Leah Cheney says this is very incriminating. It's a very big deal. And the thing is, you find out later that there were 8 sperm cells on Betsy's body, or on and around, in and around. And not to get graphic, but there should be millions of sperm cells if it was a recent act.
Right.
And Russ does say they had intimacy about 4 days before the autopsy.
Right.
So that would have been, like a day or 2 before she died. So
8 cells?
They're-
I mean, you could pick those up anywhere. I mean,
well, yeah, it's just the way that this Leah kind of spins that fact to make it seem incriminating is troubling.
Yes.
They do find out Russ was having an affair, which obviously doesn't look good.
Right.
The mistress was questioned, and she had said she eventually ended the affair because Russ wouldn't commit to her.
He wouldn't pick.
Right. So that doesn't look good, but again...
Well, they had separated 3 times, so maybe
during
that
maybe she was with other people. I mean, I don't know that. I'm just saying
we
that
don't
you
know the dynamics of that part of the
Exactly.
relationship. Nobody really speaks of that, or who, maybe they don't know, So.
Right. So because, the evidence was largely circumstantial, Lincoln County executed another search warrant on January 3rd, which is ridiculous because this crime happened on December 27th. So now the scene has been released back to the family, and people are in and out of that house, and now they're doing a search warrant to process the kitchen. What is that, 6 days later? Or 7 days later? It makes...
That should be totally inadmissible. Anything found...
Right.
That's completely...
So during this
crazy.
Second search warrant, because again, they had searched the house right away,
Right.
and numerous digital photographs were taken of the kitchen, because that was their main reason for doing this second search warrant.
Right.
And according to Leah Cheney, this second search warrant revealed that blood had been cleaned up at the sink, and she makes this big deal about the fact that the killer knew where the towels were.
Oh.
Because their towel drawer was not right next to the kitchen sink. And when they could see on this blood trail that the killer only opened up that towel drawer as if to imply the killer knew where the towels were. And she said that was like that was literally like the main reason that put him over the edge to arrest Russ. Was this towel thing.
Towel drawer?
Which I just was like,
you think you'd have to have a little more
they
concrete evidence than that.
Well, that's not, I mean, for all you know, to me that just doesn't.
What DA is going to be like, oh yeah, arrest?
Well, and Pam Hupp would know where the towel drawer was too, because
so would anybody maybe who's ever been there.
Or maybe the killer got lucky and
right.
happened to find it right away.
Right.
Who knows? So on January 4th, 2012, the prosecution gets a warrant for Russ's arrest, and Russ is shocked by this. You know, he wasn't expecting it.
Right.
And but he's in jail. He immediately calls his cousin. She's a woman named Mary Anderson.
Right.
Mary Anderson and all of Russ's family did believe he was innocent, and Mary knew this really good attorney, a defense attorney named Joel Schwartz. So Russ hires Joel Schwartz, and
by the way, awesome attorney.
He's a great attorney.
Yes.
So he goes to interview Russ in jail. And Schwartz says after speaking to Russ for several hours, he just knew Russ didn't do it. And he doesn't always think that about every client. Like
right.
He really... And he said the biggest reasoning was because 4 other people were with him for the entire evening.
Right.
So it wasn't like... So they knew, based on the autopsy, that she was murdered somewhere in the 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. range.
Right.
Which lines up with that cell phone store thing.
Right.
And Schwartz said, you know, I've heard of one person lying about someone's alibi, but not 4 separate people.
Right.
So immediately when he found out there were 4 people that alibied Russ, he thought we should be able to get him exonerated with alone. And he said
that whole time period he was with those people.
Exactly. And he said everything Russ said was verifiable. So Schwartz's defense relies on the fact that other people had access to Betsy, including Pam Hupp. The fact that the insurance proceeds were switched to Pam 4 days before the murder, and Pam was the last person to see Betsy alive.
Right.
So of course, you know, he's got the alibi, and then he's got this alternative suspect in Pam Hupp.
Right.
Now he's like, I don't know if Pam did it or not, but she's definitely just as much of a suspect as Russ.
Well, yeah.
If not more.
Right.
So, right before the trial, so, you know, Joel Schwartz, the attorney, is initially pretty confident in the case, and then shortly before the trial, Leah Cheney files a motion to exclude any mention of Pam Hupp as a suspect. And he is not allowed to talk about the fact that the life insurance policy was changed into Pam's name 4 days prior to the murder.
I can't believe a judge would rule that was okay or inadmissible. That's completely.
And then when they question Leah Cheney about this, she's like, well, you can't, she's like, if you're going to do a defense that someone else did it, you have to have some proof. And it's like...
But there was pretty substantial...
Yeah, she had a motive.
Motive, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. There was a motive and so many...
Even if it's circumstantial, circumstantial is evidence.
Right.
So... Right. Anyhow, that was her explanation for it. So, of course, Joel Schwartz, the attorney, finds this out, and he's like, this is not good.
Right.
You know, like, our whole defense relies on this.
Right.
So, the trial began November 18th, 2013. And at this point, Russ had been in jail for nearly 2 years.
Wow. They kept him in jail that whole time?
Yes. Yep. It was a murder charge.
Well, I know it's a murder charge, but was the bail amount maybe too high, or maybe they didn't let him?
I think it might have been no bail.
Oh, it might have been a no bail.
Yeah.
Okay, or something.
It was either too much or no bail.
Okay.
So Leah announces in the opening statement that Russ's motive was greed and that he wanted Betsy's insurance policy. Now, mind you, Joel Schwartz was told he's not allowed to bring up Pam Hupp's name.
Right.
So, of course, Joel Schwartz is like, well, she's bringing Pam into this.
Right.
And so he, like, objects, and they hold, like, a sidebar. And the judge tells them, well, Leah can, the prosecutor, she can mention Pam, but you can't.
Yeah, you think the judge might have been a little bit,
They were in cahoots, for sure.
in the prosecuting attorney's corner, like something was going on.
There was definitely something going on.
And the reason, I still can't understand the reason. What was the...
And Schwartz described it as he thought the judge, I don't know if the judge was really inexperienced,
Right.
but that she just simply didn't really know what she was doing.
I wonder if she's still a judge.
I have no information about that.
Well, I hope not.
So at this point, after Schwartz finds this out, he's like even more worried because now he said, I'm up against a prosecutor that's literally going to do anything to win.
Right.
And a judge that's incompetent.
Right.
That's what he's up against.
Oh.
And so...
It's not looking good at this point.
Exactly. And on top of that, Betsy's daughters testified against Russ, unfortunately. Ooh. They kind of had been brainwashed by the prosecution because, the police are basically telling them that he did this.
Right. But still, that man helped raise you.
And it's sad because, other people said, they really did have a great relationship overall, even though there were bumps in the road.
Right.
But the girls made Russ look like a horrible person on the stand.
Right, even though that was their only father figure.
And something that I thought was kind of striking is the sister Julie, Betsy's sister. She makes a comment that, like, they just wanted to get someone put away for it. Like, someone held responsible. And she never really alludes to the fact of, like, don't you want it to be the right person?
The right person.
And it didn't seem
it's like
like
they just wanted it to be over. They wanted the closure, but they didn't want, they didn't care who it was. I mean, it's so bizarre. Wouldn't they at some point go, you guys, he didn't do this. Like,
yeah, one would think, but that's unfortunately not what happened.
Not what happened.
So the prosecution also says Russ showered after the murder, but the defense argued, all the drains were checked, including the pipes, and there was no blood, and so he showered, and again, he called the police within like 2 minutes of arriving home. So how on earth he cleaned up and took a shower, but then it just, none of it makes any sense.
No.
So the Lincoln County detective testifies about that search that was done 7 days after the murder.
Right.
The defense was never given a report about that second search.
Oh.
Which...
Aren't they required to do that?
They are. And there were all these photos taken at that second search. 132 pictures, to be exact. And they all disappeared. They couldn't find them. They got lost.
They lost them, so now somebody's just testifying about it?
So, yes.
Oh, convenient.
Right.
Oh,
so,
doesn't sound
the jurors
fishy.
in the case were asked to just take the detective's word regarding what the photos showed. So, and of course, Joel Schwartz said he objected to this, and
of course,
they didn't care.
Because it's not...
the Arby's receipt was for 9:09 p.m., and he called the police not long after that, so it just not adding up, but for whatever reason, it was like the jury...
They were working so hard to make that timeline fit where he could kill her, but anybody should have been able to see right through that.
Yeah, like they showed them trying to make that drive from the friend's house.
And they were like zooming.
They
They
were going like 90 miles per hour to try to make their timeline to prepare for court.
Yeah.
And they couldn't do it without literally going, and they had sirens going.
Right.
Where you can drive it. Like,
sirens.
Russ was not going to be driving like that.
No. That would have flagged someone's attention and he would have probably been pulled over.
Exactly. So that part was very, but of course the jury's not getting it presented to them that way. Wow. They're getting it like, oh, we were able to make it from, that's all they're being told. We were able to make it from the friend's house.
They're not seeing the video.
Right.
That they showed.
Yes, exactly. So,
but still, if you're a jury and you're thinking about all these different facts, you've got the 4 people saying we were with him during this entire time frame. We've got the Arby's receipt. You think you could put 2 and 2 together, and anyone could put 2 and 2 together and say, okay, well, this obviously he didn't commit this crime. He didn't. He didn't kill her.
And something that Joel Schwartz, the lawyer, mentioned, that he thought it was just unreal that 4 innocent men were implicated in a murder plot.
Right.
Referring to the game night buddies, and you just don't do that.
No.
Like, that's just not okay. And then it's like and Leah, I'm trying to think of what her excuse was about that. She goes, well, I wasn't saying, that they were involved. I was just saying that their timeline, I didn't agree with their timeline. And it's like, no. You actually said they were all in on it.
Right. Right.
So the jury only deliberated for 5 hours, and the prosecutor said, oh, I really thought that meant he wasn't going to be convicted and that we lost, but to my pleasant surprise, we won.
Jeez.
So he was convicted of first-degree murder,
Wow.
Russ Faria, and he was given
First degree.
Yep, life in prison without parole. His mother collapsed at the news.
Yes, as would any mother. Jesus,
yes.
Terrible.
And one of the jurors after the trial was asked what made them think Russ was guilty. And the juror told them that she knew Leah Cheney, the prosecutor, and her whole family did. And they just trusted her. Plain and simple.
So, and you brought up before when we were talking, should you be able to know the prosecutor or their family?
No, I mean, when
be
they're
on the jury?
Right, when they're screening jurors, like, that's why sometimes they move trials into different counties.
Right.
One of the things, like, if you know the attorney, like,
Right.
to me that would be automatic disqualification.
Or their family.
Yeah.
Like their parents or close family.
And I know, like, Lincoln County and Troy, Missouri's a small town.
Right.
But it's like I was telling you, like, I don't know who our prosecutor is in the county I live in, to be quite honest.
And who their family is.
Yeah, so it's not like they could never find a person that doesn't know the prosecutor. Like,
Right.
I just don't believe that.
Right.
And if it's an issue, then you have to move the trial.
Move the trial, exactly.
So, that is just another
And
thing.
that might go back to the judge being maybe inexperienced or not.
Right. Yes, for sure. Because
someone competent.
Someone had to approve of that.
Right.
So, of course, Joel Schwartz immediately gets to work on Russ's appeal.
Right.
So 2 years later, so now Russ has been in jail going on 4 years. Joel Schwartz says he's sitting in his office. This is the attorney. And he receives, like, a manila envelope, and he opens it, and it's unmarked, like, as to who it's from. And there's a CD in the envelope, and it's a CD, so he puts the CD in, his computer, and it's got the pictures from that were supposedly lost in the trial.
Wow.
And with the luminol testing that they had done in the kitchen during that second shady search that they did.
Right.
He has no idea who,
somebody had a conscience.
Yes, somebody knew that it wasn't right. And not only that, they found out that that CD had been accessed by the prosecution on 5 separate occasions.
So they knew.
So they knew
existed,
it was there.
But they knew that it wouldn't
favor them.
Right. They knew that it wouldn't favor them, and so the investigator, how did they get the investigator in on it?
That's the thing, is, you talk about, like, conspiracy theories. This really was a conspiracy.
It was.
Because you've got the judge, the attorney, the investigators.
Right.
Maybe even, like officials, like secretaries, and in on this. And I'm wondering if it was like some kind of
and then you have to wonder
a paralegal or
if
something.
they've done this kind of thing before.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, this isn't just something you just do on a whim.
Right.
And I think she really wanted to win the case, and there was a lot of pressure because that county doesn't have a lot of murders.
Right.
But you still need to get the right person.
Exactly.
So, of course, because of this new information, something else he finds out that's very pertinent is, so Joel Schwartz gets a call from an attorney that tells him that Betsy's daughters are actually suing Pam Hupp because she never gave them the insurance proceeds.
That's just...
She kept them. And of course that changes everything.
Well, right.
So it comes out in the civil suit that Pam Hupp was actually pressured by multiple officials, including prosecutor Leah Cheney, to make a trust for Leah and Mariah, Betsy's daughters.
Right.
So that she wouldn't be a suspect.
Right. They're like, do this, and this is what's going to...
So they knew she was a viable suspect,
right.
And they helped her.
Yeah.
Not be one.
Right.
So,
but then she still went and probably spent the money. I don't know. They never say what happened to the money.
I'm sure she did.
Yeah.
So, days after Russ was found guilty of the murder, Pam revoked the trust. She defunded the trust.
That is completely insane.
So, that's obviously,
There wasn't someone monitoring this.
And there's actually a video.
The thing that...
Well, yeah. That's why this lawyer's calling and saying, hey, like, there's this new information about... And there was a video of Pam talking to this guy, telling her, you need to make this trust. And she was like, if I really wanted money, she's like, my mom is worth $500,000. So I could just, get her life insurance. I wouldn't have to take on somebody who's physically stronger than me, like Betsy. She said that. That's a creepy, crazy thing to say to somebody.
Right. Why would that be your response?
Exactly. So the new photos, coupled with this new information about Pam Hupp, they granted Russ a new trial. And he was granted bail, and so he was able to get out of jail after 4 years.
That's crazy.
So, because of the issues with the jury last time, they decided to request a bench trial. And what that is sense. Where a judge decides the outcome, and that's it. There's no jury, so whatever the judge decides, that's what it is.
That's guilty, innocent, that's that.
And a side note, Betsy's daughters lost the civil suit against Pam, unfortunately, because there was no documentation that Betsy had wanted the girls to get the trust. Now, maybe Betsy had planned on writing up a document, and that was of concern to Pam.
But why the heck would, over her daughters, Pam, why would she pick Pam to get the $150,000?
That's a great question.
Yes.
So Pam now is saying that she and Betsy were lesbian lovers.
4 years after, though, right?
Yeah, 4 years after the murder, they're lesbian lovers, and that's why Russ was so angry, because he caught them together.
But then, still...
He said something about...
Even if they are lesbian lovers, or whatever.
Which they were not.
They weren't, but even if they were, let's,
entertain the idea.
They're lesbian lovers. Why still would she choose her lesbian lover over her 2 daughters?
Well,
you still wouldn't.
Well, exactly.
So that blows that right there.
Yeah, that's insanity. So on November 2nd, 2015, there's a second trial, and Russ Faria is acquitted of the murder.
Finally.
Not only is he acquitted, the judge says he was outraged. He said, "This is like the most poorly done investigation." He said, "I now have more questions than answers."
Right.
And he just was kind of flabbergasted by the whole thing.
Right.
So the family at this point is starting to kind of doubt whether Russ is actually responsible for Betsy's murder or not.
Finally,
they finally are kind of like, maybe it wasn't him.
Right.
So.
And you gotta think, I mean, we can't speak for anybody, but you kind of have to wonder if they kind of knew you know what I mean? Some of them kind of knew who it really was.
I agree. So, Russ is living a normal life. He's trying to move on after being in jail for 4 years. And on August 16th, 2016, a 911 call comes in from a home in O'Fallon, Missouri.
Okay.
There's a woman that can be heard screaming, and she starts reporting a home invasion.
Mm-hmm.
She's saying, "Help, help." And she said, "Somebody's in my house." And you hear gunshots on this 911 call, and the caller reports having shot the intruder.
Sure. Now,
Missouri has very loose stand your ground type laws. So if you feel threatened by an intruder, you can shoot them. I mean, their laws are really loose on that compared to other states.
Right.
Turns out this female caller is none other than Miss Pam Hupp, or Mrs. She's actually married too.
She's notorious in the area.
Right. They know of her.
They knew, like, oh no.
Because there have been articles in the paper and stuff. So Pam says she was running errands. She had gone back home to take her dog out, and she got back into her vehicle, presumably to run more errands, and someone jumps in her car with a knife. Pam says she's able to slap the knife out of the man's hand. She then runs inside her house, grabs her gun, and shoots the intruder 5 times, and he is gunned down basically in the entryway of her home. And so at this point, the police are kind of, they have to investigate everything. Yeah. So the first thing they do, they find out who is the dead man on the floor.
Right.
And they couldn't actually figure that out right away. They didn't know who he was, and eventually, because he had
didn't have ID on him or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And he didn't have like a wallet or anything like that.
Right.
They do find in the dead man's pocket a note that has like a checklist on it in really terrible handwriting.
Yeah.
And it says, one of the things on the checklist is get Russ's money. And, another thing it says is take Pam to the bank, take out $150,000. Now remember, Betsy's life insurance policy was $150,000. And then it says drop money in woodpile at Russ Faria's house.
Well, so don't you think that Russ would have assumed she spent the money?
Well, that's one, like, why would you think she just is going to have that sitting in there?
Yeah. No,
so they start kind of dissecting this 911 call, and you can hear a man talking who is the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator. And you can kind of tell that this man has some kind of a speech impediment.
Sure.
So they get speech analysis done by the FBI, and they are able to determine that the man is saying, "I'm going to do to you what I did to Russ's wife." Okay. So the implication is that this intruder was the person that killed Betsy Faria.
Oh, sure.
So Pam goes to the station voluntarily for questioning.
Right.
And she tells police that Russ had just gotten out of jail and that there was just the civil trial with Russ's daughters, and she's like, Russ was sitting behind me in court, and she basically was trying to imply that Russ had recruited the dead man to go after her life insurance payout. Like, he was mad that she won the civil trial, and Pam denies having ever seen this man before.
Oh.
So, of course, this was August of 2016. Russ says, I'm sitting in my living room,
Right.
and I get this call from my dad, and my dad's like, "Oh my gosh, she did it again! She did it again!" And he's like, "Who did what again?"
No.
And he's like, "She shot somebody else," referring to Pam Hupp.
Jeez.
So of course, right after that, Russ gets a call from his attorney Joel Schwartz,
Yeah.
and he says, "Hey, Russ, the police really want to talk to you." So Russ, knowing he hadn't done anything, willingly goes to the police station with his attorney, and he says
reluctantly, because come on.
Yes, he did say, at this point I
They'd
don't
already
trust
arrested
the
him
police.
for 4 years.
Right. And so he's like, "But I had nothing to hide," so he said,
Right.
"I let the police have my cell phone for like 3 days."
Yeah.
And they took handwriting samples to compare it to that note, and they checked his alibi, and Russ was, released, and he was never like in jail.
This time, yeah.
He was, they were able to exclude him from this, whatever happened.
Right.
So through fingerprints, the police are finally able to identify the deceased male in Pam's entryway. Well, he's probably at the morgue now, but at the time, as a man named Louis Gumpenberger. Now, Louis Gumpenberger had a petty criminal history, so nothing violent.
Right.
And that's why his prints were on file.
Okay.
He's a 33-year-old single man.
Okay.
And they get his last known address is about 15 minutes away from Pam's house.
Okay.
It's like an apartment complex.
Oh, sure.
So investigators go to the address, and they are able to find Lewis's mother living at that address.
Oh, sure.
So investigators tell Lewis's mother what is alleged that Lewis has done or was involved with at any rate.
Well, I'm sure she's devastated too.
Yeah, she was very upset, but just in regards to how she wanted to explain to them how Lewis could not have been involved. She tells them several years prior, Lewis was involved in a very severe car accident that actually left him physically and mentally disabled.
Right. He couldn't.
He had the mental capacity of about a 12-year-old at best, and the physical ability of someone in their 80s.
Ooh.
He walked with a limp, he was unsteady on his feet, and he was unable to run.
Right.
So she said, for his day-to-day life, he can't work.
Right.
He sits out front, smokes cigarettes,
Sure.
and very gullible and easily influenced by people.
Right. So someone could just drive by and be like, "Hey, you want to
get
do
him,
this?"
Yeah, get him involved in something.
In
really,
anything, probably.
which is horrible, but
Right.
that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
So based on Gumpenberger's physical and mental limitations, they're like, there's no way Pam's story could be true.
Right.
So at this point, they're like...
He didn't put together a home invasion.
Right. Which, and it was more complicated than just a home invasion. You're talking about, like, he was gonna,
Get
supposedly,
$150,000.
drive her to the bank, which I don't even know if he drove.
Right. Could he even drive?
If he's got the mental capacity of a 12-year-old.
They probably don't allow people.
I would, because 12-year-olds aren't allowed to drive.
Right, that's what I mean. He probably didn't drive. I don't know, but probably not.
So they started investigating Pam, finally, and they find a receipt in Pam's trash. Here we go again with the ridiculous receipts. For a purchase from a dollar store so they find the knife that the intruder had in Pam's car. Because, of course, the knife is still there because the intruder was shot dead. And so they take the knife as evidence, and they're finding a receipt in Pam's trash for that very knife that was found in her car. That was supposedly the perpetrator's knife.
Oh.
It was a very specific butcher knife that she got at like a Dollar General store.
So it was not
a great knife.
No, I'm
either.
thinking of the knives they have at Dollar General. I mean, I don't know.
So investigators went to the dollar store, and they find that the knife was the same one.
Right.
And so then they start kind of analyzing this 911 phone call.
Right.
And let me tell you, I don't know if this lady was so used to getting away with things that she just didn't even try.
Right.
But she's
She didn't
literally
care
like,
anymore.
she's just like, help, help, someone's breaking in. Oh my gosh, a man, help. help. And it's so fake.
It's so bad.
It's really bad. You can listen to it. It's out there.
Oh, it is so bizarre that she, yeah.
And, of course, the police are like, wow, it really sounds like this is rehearsed and that she's acting. And another really ridiculous thing, so there was a small section of carpet under Louis Gumpenberger's body. Like, she knew someone was going to be bleeding on her carpet, and she didn't want it to make a mess on her carpet. So she put, like, a little piece of rug there to, like, so the blood would go on that piece of rug and not on her carpet.
And she doesn't think people are going to notice this?
That was my thought, exactly. I'm like, that's how, because she's so narcissistic.
She's narcissistic in her mental capacity. Her mental capacity has to be a little...
I don't know that I think that. I think she's gotten away with so many things related.
She's just kind of upping the ante. I mean, like, just kind of...
I think she just thinks, you know, I'm this older white woman. They're never going to suspect me of things like this.
Right.
You know, I've always gotten away with things based on who I am, and why would it change now? That's what I think. I don't think she had a low IQ.
No, I mean... But something... is definitely off.
I mean, she's off. She's a psychopath.
She's a psychopath. I mean, yeah, a total psychopath. Like she has to have the diagnosis of a psychopath.
For sure,
yeah. Tendencies or whatever that the official diagnosis is. Yeah.
So police end up getting a call from one of their partner agencies.
Right.
And they say, the caller says, you know, so this is a police agency calling another police agency. Mm-hmm. And so they're calling the police agency that's handling Pam Hupp's investigation.
Right.
And he says, I think you're going to want to hear about this call we got from a woman. He said about a week prior to the Louis Gumpenberger incident, a woman named Carol McAfee, called the police, and so Carol McAfee is a resident of Rolling Meadows Mobile Home, mm-hmm. which is a mobile home park in Missouri.
Right.
And so this woman says, you know, I had gone outside to let my dogs out, and this woman pulls up to my mobile home in a black GMC Acadia, mm-hmm. and she's just staring at me.
Oh.
So the woman...
Super normal.
Thought maybe she was like a new neighbor, so
right.
She approaches the vehicle and she's like, you know, can I help you?
Yeah. Why are you staring at me?
Yeah, why are you staring at me? But she was just trying to be polite. So right. The woman in the car tells Carol that she's a Dateline producer.
Oh. And
that they're recording 911 calls and reenactments. She then tells the woman, if you will help us with this reenactment of this 911 call, we'll give you $1,000 cash. No paper trail to Uncle Sam, which, I'm sorry, if Dateline is paying you, they're not going to be tax-free.
No, and they're not going to be just strolling through a mobile home park. Just one producer or whatever.
It's funny, I think it was Keith Morrison said, just FYI, like, we don't go find people to do our reenactment.
Not in that way.
Yeah, that's not what we do.
We don't go through neighborhoods.
And so and then the woman in the car tells Carol that she can't bring her cell phone or her keys because the producer doesn't like clutter.
That just doesn't even make sense. Right. Specifically your cell phone and keys. I mean, look.
So Carol...
You've got to have, like, in your head, like...
What's going on here?
Yeah, warning signs blinking, you know, like...
So Carol gets in the car, mm-hmm. and she's like, I agreed despite being a bit suspicious, but she's like, you know what? I kind of just wanted to find out what the woman is up to.
Right.
So, you know, of course I don't think initially she's thinking, oh, my life is in danger. She just was curious.
Right.
So, about 2 minutes into that car ride, Carol's like, I just got a really bad feeling, and maybe she started to be like, well, why can't I have my phone? You know, that type of thing.
Right.
So she's like, I just told the woman that I left my door unlocked and that my dog was going to get out, and she didn't have shoes on either. So she was like,
I need some shoes.
Excuse, and of course the woman was trying to get her to not go back home, but she's like, no, you need to take me home. So
She's lucky she took her home.
Yes.
I mean, let's be real.
So the woman in the vehicle.
Do you mind that I'm eating some of these?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Laura's eating chips.
Yeah, sorry, I can.
I really don't care at all.
Whose chips are they?
They're nobody's. So the woman notices that Carol has security cameras when they get back to the house.
Oh.
And she, of course, Carol says, the woman, it was like, well, you've got security cameras? And Carol's like, well, yeah, I do.
Right.
And she, like a lot of people do.
Right.
And then that when she went into the house, the woman just drove off. Which is odd, because it's
the
like...
The whole thing is very odd.
Yes. So she said, I just put in this call to police just because it was very strange.
Right.
And she said a big reason was because the woman seemed spooked by those cameras.
Right.
So police are like, we want to look at this security footage.
Right.
And when they do, they get the license plate off of the black SUV, and what do you know? It comes back to Pam Hupp.
She used her own vehicle?
Yeah, well, that's another thing, too.
Like if you're... That's what I mean. I feel
they
like
got a very vivid image of her driving the car, so even had she not, they
might have recognized her anyways, but you think you would think...
Because I think they went into this thinking it was her.
Sure.
When they got this, that was why the other agency called the other agency.
Okay, so they'd already kind of...
Connected the dots.
Connected, because this is a low crime area, so...
Yeah, this is small town Missouri.
Right.
So, of course, police determined that Pam was trolling for somebody to kind of unknowingly frame Russ.
Right.
And that's what she did to Louis Gumpenberger. So the plan didn't work with Carol. And Carol said that Pam told her in that short car ride that, Carol would be acting as the intruder and that Pam would be the 911 caller for this Dateline reenactment. So essentially this woman, like you said, she averted possibly getting murdered.
Right. She's lucky, though, that she let her go.
Yeah, she could have just kept driving. But then she wouldn't have done the whole acting part.
Well, right.
So
then she would have had to just kill her, but...
She would have had no reason.
Or whatever she was going to do, but, yeah.
So, of course, the thought is Pam probably told Louis, like, hey, we're just doing a reenactment. We're acting.
Right.
So...
And, of course, he's going along with this because he's got that lowered mental capacity.
Yeah, and ultimately she maybe realized I have to pick somebody who's not completely, who has a lower IQ, because she realized after the thing with Carol that, maybe people aren't going to go for this.
Right.
So, and she was getting desperate because after Russ was acquitted, Russ was really open about pointing the finger at her.
Right.
So she's trying to frame him again.
Yeah.
Like she had already framed him.
Right. She already did once, and then it was like almost an OCD type of thing. Like she had to...
Yeah, I don't know. I just think she's just so narcissistic.
Right.
So anyhow, on August 23rd, 2016, Pam Hupp is finally arrested for the murder of Louis Gumpenberger.
Took long enough.
Her only response was that she was cold in the back of the squad car and she wanted the AC turned down. And when they get to the station and try to begin questioning her, she immediately requests a lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
She then... she didn't talk at all. And she did ask to use the restroom once they got to the station, and she had covertly put a pen in her waistband, and she stabbed herself in the neck and wrists with a ballpoint pen.
Oh.
Ow. But it was very superficial, and it was just like a way for her to kind of divert. She then, I think, had to go to the hospital and kind of got the attention, or she got out of the jail system for a while to go to the hospital.
Right. Maybe she was thinking, once I get to the hospital, maybe I can
weasel my way out of this
or something,
somehow.
But they kept her.
And one of the detectives commented, normally women in their late 50s don't just start committing heinous crimes.
Right.
So
like, they start out this way. Like, what?
So they start looking...
doing these things all her whole life? life?
Well, they do start looking into Pam's past, and they find out that 2 years after Betsy's death,
Right.
so Betsy died in 2011.
Right.
So in 2013, Pam's mother died after falling off the third-floor balcony of her retirement community. And this retirement community had no dementia ward, unfortunately, because that's really what her mother needed. And they start remembering that Pam had made that comment in one of the videos about, oh, if I wanted life insurance money, my mom is worth a whole lot more. So they kind of they're like, huh. And now they find out since that time her mother has died.
Oh, sure.
So her mother had fallen off of a third-floor balcony at her retirement community.
Ooh.
And she was last seen with her daughter, Pam Hupp, no less. And
had they not heard of her or something, like her case?
Yeah, they hadn't, because this was before Pam was ever looked at. You know, she wasn't allowed in that first trial, so nobody knew about her publicly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then at that time, you know, the prosecutors and the investigators were all pro Pam Hupp for whatever reason.
Right.
So they weren't shedding suspicion on her. So no, nobody knew at this point.
Okay.
So Pam tells the staff at the retirement community that her mom will not be down for dinner or for breakfast the next morning. And they found 8 times the legal limit of Ambien in her mother's system.
Jeez.
And they said, you know, based on her mother's size, there was just absolutely no way her mother could have there were like bars broken off of the balcony. So Pam Hupp was put on trial for the murder of Louis Gumpenberger, and the death penalty was on the table because she literally sacrificed a mentally disabled man.
Right.
For
what?
To be involved in her little scheme. And the family agreed if she would plead guilty with no trial that they would do life in prison without parole.
Well, that was very kind of them because...
Yes, it was. And so there was no trial, but she is incarcerated.
She made an Alford plea.
Yes.
Yeah. So she said, which is basically,
You say you're not... You say there's enough evidence.
You say there's enough evidence, but you're not admitting guilt.
Yeah, which... That's kind of a kick in the...
It is. It's a little...
For the family, but they were agreeable, so...
Right.
In 2018, Lincoln County elected a new prosecutor named Mike Wood, so Leah Cheney is out of there. And
thank goodness.
let me tell you, I think she is a bigger villain in this story than a lot of news outlets have portrayed her as.
Right.
She, if you watch, there's a ton of stuff on this case, so Dateline, People Magazine investigates 48 Hours. There's a reenactment with Renee Zellweger called The Thing About Pam. If you watch any of that, Leah Cheney is, talks and is interviewed in all of these productions.
Right. I can't believe she admits to these things just readily. Like,
and she to this day will not admit that Russ was wrongly convicted.
Right.
To this day.
Right. Even
will
though
not admit it.
Completely obvious.
And you want to talk about like a narcissist, like that's really, really disgusting behavior too.
Right. Maybe it was like one narcissist covering for another narcissist.
Yeah, it was almost, I feel like she's like similar to Pam in a weird way.
In a weird way, maybe not as in a violent way, but...
So she thinks her killing Louis Gumpenberger, she said in another interview that I saw with her, she was like, well, I don't see how one correlates with the other.
Well, come on.
Like, are you kidding me? It's just crazy.
I mean, she hasn't been convicted, but potentially she's killed at least 3 people. That could be either that's it, or that could be the tip of the iceberg. She was in her 50s. Who knows what she was doing?
Yeah, prior to this.
Right.
So, she's finally held accountable, and they are going to, I believe murder charges have been filed against Pam for Betsy's murder, but of course trials take years to come, and I don't believe that trial has happened yet.
No.
I could be wrong on
I
that.
don't think so.
And of course, Russ will be able to like make a victim impact statement in that trial. So, one little happy ending to this story is Russ actually married Carol McAfee, the woman from the that was lured for the Dateline video. Russ and her are married.
Wow.
Did you know that?
No.
That was right at the end of. Pretty much all the documentaries talk about that at the end, but
Right.
Russ now owns a motorcycle shop. He did sue the Lincoln County. I don't know who he sued exactly, but he got like a $2 million settlement, and rightfully so, I would say.
Right.
And he owns a motorcycle shop in our home state of Minnesota.
Oh, that's surprising.
Yeah, I just read that. I had never heard that before.
Here is 4 days ago.
Yeah, she's looking good. She just showed me a picture of Pam, one of
4
her.
day recent picture. There's like a.
No, that's her booking photo
Oh.
from when she
She did her
herself
stab
in the
thing.
neck.
I'm like, why? What is going on there?
So yeah, that's the story of a serial killer. Now, if they are gonna start looking into Pam's mother's murder or
Whoa.
death, which I say is a murder. So,
But the problem with these things going back is there evidence? Do you know what I mean? Like, they didn't come and collect any evidence. They didn't.
if you watch the Dateline on this, they actually did a reenactment at her mother's retirement home in the balcony
Right.
with like a dummy that weighed what her mother weighed to show that her mother could not have caused the damage of the balcony. So they're trying anyway.
Right.
But there's no statute of limitations on
No.
a murder charge, so hopefully
I just hope she's put away forever, and that's
she already is.
Right.
So
So-
she can't get paroled. But what an odd, I mean, this case is just insane.
And then you worry too. You know, kind of a funny thing. I feel like she should be in a cell alone and not get to be around other people, because I feel like she is that manipulative.
One of the prison guards says that's what she does in jail.
Right.
She
could cause so many issues within the jail.
She did. That's what she's been doing.
Yeah.
She'll
I
like
could see that.
She'll pit inmates against each other for fun.
Right, because she's a psychopath.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how she gets her kicks.
Mm-hmm.
That's how she gets off. So they really, I hope they
I don't even give
put her
the,
by
the
herself.
pleasure of
Solitary confinement. You come out your 1 hour a day by yourself. You know what I mean? Like, she should not be around people for life, except for maybe the guards.
Yeah.
But even then, you hear those stories of, manipulating the guards. I mean, that's just how dangerous she is.
And that's what they said is she had, because they interviewed a guard that was no longer working there. That's why she was so willing to talk.
Speak, yeah.
And she said she did try to manipulate the guards as well as the prisoners.
I hope that they didn't.
Like they said she was like always trading like commissary items and just very, so she's still able to kind of get her thrills in prison.
Right, that's what I mean. She needs to be all by herself.
Yeah.
You know?
So anyway, that is the story. I hope that you learned something about the case that you didn't already know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, it's very...
And,
It's a very fascinating case, and it seems like they're always learning new elements as they go along.
It's the true crime word of the day, I say, very convoluted.
Convoluted.
Yes, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah.
But
it is
worth it to try to
analyze.
I think it's a case you'll see in like criminal justice schools or law schools for years to come. Right.
Like, and how did it get to that point? They could have stopped it from getting to that point
much sooner.
And there are some, certain people to blame for that, and they won't be held accountable, and that is
Well, and one of the things that's been brought up about this case too is the prosecutorial immunity
Right.
that prosecutors have, and that's Russ said too. Leah Cheney's never going to be held responsible for her role because of that.
Well,
There is still misconduct.
there's misconduct, and you still can't break the law. Well, were any of those things breaking laws or there's gotta be laws against
the checking out that evidence that they said disappeared.
right.
That's got to be illegal.
Right. There's right.
So,
So you would think if they really dug deep enough, they could actually maybe hold these people responsible. Disbarment or whatever it is that they can do.
But I guess prosecutorial immunity is like, it's really hard to get a prosecutor in trouble. That's the impression I got when they were talking about it.
Well, this goes beyond the scope, though. This has to go beyond the scope of any rules that relate to that. I mean, this is...
It is crazy.
The abuse of power.
Yeah, it's nuts.
You shouldn't be able to abuse your power as a prosecutor.
No, absolutely not.
And that's what happened.
So we hope you keep listening, and we will be back within a week or two. And I think next time we're gonna, one of the cases we're gonna do, I'm not gonna say who it is, but it's gonna be a very unknown case to people, to most people.
Yes.
And so that'll be good. It was a request from our cousin Kelly.
Yes.
I call him Kelly. I always will.
It's Leo.
Leo.
Mm-hmm.
So shout out to him as well.
Yes.
And we will see you guys soon.
See you soon. Ta-ta.